my channel. I hope you are well. Today I've got another special guest. My mother I roped her in. We're gonna have a little chat, aren't we? Firstly, how are you?
Oh, Amy, a never ending question. I feel like a swan.
A swan? Tell us more.
Probably calmish on the exterior and paddling frantically underneath the water at the minute because of everything that's going on.
We have a lot going on in our little lives, don't we?
We certainly do. We certainly do.
We're going to go back 30 years to when I was born. How was it for you becoming a mum? Like, how were you feeling when you became a mum for the first time? Because I am the oldest.
Well, I was just 24, as you know, and not drastically young, but fairly young. And I was obviously so excited. So back in the day, there was no mobile phones, and I know when my contractions started, we were living with Nanny and Grandad because we had bought a house to renovate. So I was making curtains.
Like you do. And I just can't. It's funny, like now, like how I am, how the times are now, that can't imagine there not being phones.
There was no mobile phones.
Were you not panicking?
Didn't even think about it because we didn't have them.
I know,
so your dad would go off to work, and I wouldn't speak to him again until he came home in the evening.
I feel like we need to go back to those times.
It was wonderful, and I wish we could.
Yeah.
So, you know, you were born, and you were our sort of first special little girl, but I suppose, if I'm to be honest, we didn't have our own home and we weren't settled, and I was quite envious. I remember feeling quite envious of my friends who had their first babies in their homes and they were all settled, and Nanny and Grandad were so brilliant and so supportive, and they didn't interfere. They let me get on with you know, being a mum to you, but it still didn't have that experience of just being on my own.
And did you, like, I feel like when I had Alyssa, I don't think I really remember reading like up much about having, so did you prepare in any way, or did you just literally?
You know, I actually did. I had a Johnson's & Johnson's baby
In fact,
book.
I think I'm
sure
you got it.
And it shows you. So I used to literally sit there in bed. I was so excited. I would sit there in bed reading, and it was very. It was full of illustrations. So I used to love looking at all the pictures, and it would give you, this is what you look like at 8 weeks, and this is what the baby looks like, and this is what you look like at 12 weeks. And I remember I would constantly have that out and be reading it. So yeah, we did do that, and we did have our, you know, the prenatal sort of classes, which we sort of went to. But and we did go and get the pram and things like that. But there wasn't probably. We didn't have baby showers, so that, you know, and all these bits and pieces, it was.
And I guess there's more like on social media, and more like, okay, ways to access information.
Yeah, definitely.
Now.
It was a book. It was my Johnson & Johnson's book,
yeah.
and that was it. And maybe that's a good thing, because maybe you don't worry about
you just get on with
tons of stuff, you know. So that it was just such a it was very special. And then little you came along.
I did.
In Basingstoke Hospital.
It didn't all go plain sailing though, did it?
No, it didn't. It sort of was to start with. You were born on the 30th of December. I didn't really think that through, because A, being straight after Christmas, but B, being so close to New Year's Eve, there was very little staff at Basingstoke Hospital. So I did have my concerns when you were born. You were quite nasal, and you had blue colouring around your sort of lip area, and your fingernails were quite blue. And I remember talking to the doctors about that, and they did say they would get someone to check it out. But because I think there was, you know, it was quite quiet at that time on the ward. That probably didn't get checked out as thoroughly.
And I feel when you a first-time mum, you don't have that
No, you certainly,
confidence
absolutely,
to be able to
certainly
be
don't.
like, no, something's.
You certainly
Not
don't
quite
have that
right.
confidence. You absolutely don't. Also, Amy, you didn't have your baby by your bedside. You were in a nursing room at night, and I had to be in my bed.
Are you joking?
And no, and I remember getting a right royal telling off from this more senior sort of nurse, because I just wanted to. So I'd had you at 10:30.
So what? You weren't.
No, you were in a separate room with all the other babies, and you were born at 10:30 at night. So obviously, in the early hours of the morning, I probably still couldn't sleep because I was probably so excited. Your dad had gone home, and I just sort of snuck into this room, and sat with you, and just wanted. And she told me off and told me to get back to my bed. So that was massively different. That was so old-fashioned, but. We were discharged, you know, I can't remember which day it was. It might have been New Year's Day. And we were just, you know, discharged, and off we went home, back to Nanny and Granddad's.
And I think you did have concerns.
Yeah. So firstly, your umbilical cord didn't come away like it should do in the first few days. That remained. And then you were not feeding, and you were crying an awful lot. And I remember one morning I guess we were obviously in Nanny and Granddad's house, and I'd come up to the lounge to try and give your dad some sleep with you, and I was trying to feed you, but you wouldn't. And of course, Nanny had been a nurse, so she had a certain amount of intuition, and she could see that things weren't right. So that's when we called the doctor, and basically from there we were whizzed by blue light down to Southampton Hospital.
I think it's just because it's so, like, as a new mum, that must have just been. Were you terrified?
I wasn't terrified. The uncanny thing about this experience was the day before, I think I'd been reading, I'd obviously been going to a checkup with you, and in the waiting room to see the nurse or the doctor, I had read about a child with leukemia, and I can remember thinking, how would you cope with that? How would you cope if you were suddenly told that your child had, you know, leukemia? And I couldn't cope with that. But I've learned, Amy, when you are thrown into a situation, it is amazing. The human body and you are amazing at coping with these situations. And when you're in it, it's sometimes easier than being on the outside.
I think that's what I think for me. Like, quite a lot of the things is when you, like you say, you do read about these just devastating and horrible stories. You can't ever imagine what they must go through, but I guess when you're in it, like, the thought of it's worse than, obviously everything's worse, but the thought of it,
definitely,
when you're actually living it and dealing,
when you go through it, you have no choice, you have to get on with it. So basically what I had been told was, first of all, they worried it was meningitis, and secondly, and they said less likely it was something to do with your heart. And yes, that did put the fear of God in me, but I think everything took over. You were immediately taken away in an ambulance with me. You were put in an incubator, you were given oxygen. Your saturation levels were so low, they should be about nearly 100%, and yours were 48%. So you were what is known as a blue baby. You were, your oxygen wasn't getting to your around your body. So they were taking you down to Southampton General Hospital to obviously try and work out very quickly what was going wrong. And the scariest thing, Amy, is I couldn't get hold of your dad.
I was just going to say that.
Couldn't get hold of your dad, no mobile phones. So
you're obviously going through all that on your own.
Yes, because until he came home from work at 5, 6 o'clock in the evening and would be told by nanny or granddad that you were now down in Southampton Hospital, there was no way I could get through to him. So basically, Amy, what they had to do was they had to give you a life-saving operation to, when you're born, the chamber between your heart slowly closes as your normal breathing and system takes over, and yours was closing, but you didn't have the oxygen to take over.
It's funny, I have the yearly checkups, and they always ask me, they're like, so do you know what happened to you? And I'm like, I do, but even after all this time, I still, when someone asks me, I just say the basics of my arteries were the wrong way around, so they just got switched.
So basically your arteries were literally the wrong way around, and you were like having a closed loop. It wasn't, all the oxygen wasn't being taken around your body, it was just going in a closed loop. And as that hole was closing, that sort of hole naturally closes, you were being starved of oxygen. So they had to put like a little balloon to blow that up just to keep the oxygen going until they could do the operation. Which was 2 weeks later. So basically,
I didn't realise that.
Yeah, it was about 2 weeks later. It was about.
So I was in. So when I got rushed through, I didn't rush through and have the switch.
No, because they had to
blow it up.
They did a sort of a intermediate operation to keep you going.
Do you know what? After nearly 30 years, I never realised that.
Yeah. So you had already had that operation.
Yeah.
By the time your dad got to the hospital.
Okay.
And he, you know, obviously, as you can imagine, the shock for him, and there was a lot of anger, because that's the emotion. That was the biggest emotion. We drove back that night because I knew I was going to be in hospital for probably a good 2 months.
And left me.
And so we had to leave you at that point because you were completely dependent, not on me at that point. You were, you know, had everything, leads, lines going into you.
It's really weird because you're talking about me, that was me, but it's like not me. So it feels like, I feel really sad, but it was like, that was me.
Yeah. Well, it was...
That must have been hard, having to drive back.
It was, I think it was...
And the unknown.
So I was, at that drive home, we were just both... I think the biggest emotion was anger at why it happened to us.
Yeah, yeah.
But why us? Why you? Why? But
yeah,
that's something I've learned. Well, why shouldn't it have been? Why shouldn't it have been us or you? Because life's not like that.
There was a saying that I heard the other day. It was like, God gives people, the strongest people, the biggest battles.
Well, it wasn't really, but we put our faith in. We had the top surgeon, one of the best surgeons in the world, Mr. Monroe, who's sadly passed now, but it was a very, very new operation where it's called the switch, and it is switched your arteries round.
And I'm actually really lucky that because I had this new, even though it was at the time, this new operation, I haven't had any complications from it.
No.
Whereas if I'd had maybe another, wasn't it the mustard?
It was the mustard where, so your heart now is working exactly as a normal heart should work.
Got told I had a very fit heart, and I'm fitter than most of the doctors on the ward when I went there last time.
Yes, well, there you go. The mustard basically, and the only reason they thought they literally didn't know which operation they would be able to perform until he had you under the knife. It was an 8-hour operation, and your heart was the size of a walnut. And so they basically, and because of all the little capillary vessels going around the main artery, they didn't know what they were going to be able to perform. And the second best one would be the mustard, where they did a sort of a top chamber, bottom chamber, but it's still, your arteries would have been the wrong way round. So it wouldn't have been the best scenario. So you can imagine, so 8 hours later when
you finally got to know which one it had.
Yes, I remember him walking towards me in the corridor. I remember that feeling. Nanny and Grandad had taken me off to Ocean Village in Southampton to try and take my mind off things.
Village?
Is it Ocean Village?
West Quay.
Is it West Quay?
Well, there's a big shopping centre called West Quay.
Remember this was 30 years ago.
Yeah, so it might have been called Ocean Village.
But it was a big shopping centre in Southampton, and we had gone there just to but I was so nervous. And actually,
I can imagine.
taking you into, I could only go as far to a certain point, and that saying goodbye to you was horrendous, because there was a 50-50 chance, and it was horrendous. And so when Mr. Monroe walked towards me and said, it went really well, and we've been able to carry out the switch, I could have literally hugged him. And I'm so grateful, because that care, we had to put our faith in them. And also, knowledge is power, and the more I learnt about it, and he would sit and he sat and drew it for me.
They do draw it for me every time I go down this.
Do they? Yeah, he sat and he drew it. When he sat before you had it, he sat and drew it, so that, I got more confident as the weeks went on in that hospital. And then obviously when you came out of theatre, you were in intensive care for a week, on this massive bed with all leads and lines, and you were being obviously drip fed. I couldn't feed you, I was expressing. But you sprung back so quickly. But I shared a room with another girl called Jenny, and Eloise was a very premature baby, and she had much more complicated problems with her heart. And it wasn't until I used to go back there after we came out 2 months later, and I learned that Eloise had died. And it just made me feel how grateful I was that you had survived it. But I was so sad about that, because we used to share a room together and chat, and that's how that got me through. And the doctors and nurses were so excellent.
It's actually quite incredible that I actually feel like proud of little me, that I managed to battle and get through that. It's quite like when you look back at your inner child, it's like a proud moment. So it's even like sometimes now when I'm critical of myself or my body or whatever, I need to go back to that and think, well, actually you pretty much survived at 2 weeks old. Your body survived surgery. Strong, yeah.
Definitely. And they wait until your weight, because obviously when a newborn baby, your weight dips a bit, and you were born at 8 pounds, and that was really luckily, that was a good weight. And it dipped a bit, but they were able to perform that operation probably quicker than if you had been premature or tiny. But yeah, it was an experience. Granddad used to come down and visit nearly every day, and I used to slop round the hospital in my slippers.
It is incredible, because we were saying earlier, I couldn't imagine having to go through that. So you are a very strong person for having to...
Well, I probably wasn't at the time, but this, Amy, this was my starting of my life, and life's experience, and
this is stronger.
Yes, and every experience in your life makes you stronger. And I've had a few experiences that have, and this is what helps make you more resilient, and probably why I am quite resilient. If you told anyone you're going to have your first baby, you're going to spend 2 months in hospital undergoing a major heart operation, you just would probably freak out. But you have no choice. You get on and cope with it. And that's, you did it, and you did it.
I did it. We did it. I think we're going to have to come back for part 2, because I've got loads more things I want to ask her. We've only covered basically up until I was a couple of months old, so we will have to come back and chat more for part 2. But thank you so much for watching part 1. I have enjoyed having you on, actually.
Oh, thank you. I've enjoyed being on.
I kind of forgot the camera was there at one point.
Well, we're just having our mummy
We're just having a chat. We don't really get to do that much anymore. So, but yeah, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you again soon for another video. Bye!